This is Right Now, where we take you through the top headlines that are happening not only in San Diego, but across California, the nation, and the world at large. I am Chris Gros, joined here as always by Jack Cole. Today is Tuesday, but it certainly feels like we are maybe Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not sure if that's just the heat playing tricks on my mind, if it's sort of like I see the mirage of the garden and the pool just ahead of me. I'm so close to getting out of the desert, and yet it's only going to get hotter.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right in here. It's a little toasty in here today.
Yeah, that was sort of maybe where my brain was going. I have stripped out of the tie and the long sleeve dress shirt that I get on here at the broadcast, and we have since gone with the post work shirt here, representing Goat Hill Park and the membership there. Shout out to Goat Hill Park. But look, it's a little toasty in here. It's a little toasty outside. So we're gonna labor through this and get to the top stories here, which will eventually be heat.
Yes.
We will get to that here with our extended forecast because we do want everybody to be safe. It is again a pretty serious topic here when we get this hot. But we are going to start with a topic that has surely been hot in the headlines in recent days. You may have heard us discussing Midway Rising recently, Jack. Well, that discussion continues here as it continues to run into new obstacles. But we're told this one may not be quite as serious as we have seen in terms of opposition and lawsuits and things like that. We're talking about Measure C.
Yeah.
Was repealed by the city council just yesterday. And I think it's important that we understand what Measure C is before we get into sort of the dynamics about why it is that it was repealed. Measure C, of course, was sort of the ignition to what would become Midway Rising. Measure C was approved by voters back in 2022. It asked voters, should that area be excluded from the 30-foot height limit on buildings in coastal zones? That area, of course, being the Midway Sports Arena site. When it was approved by voters, it gave the green light on the project. And again, the city council still had to approve it, but it essentially meant that as far as the 30-foot height limit, it would be sort of in the clear. This is a project that is trying to get a 16,000-seat arena built, 4,200 residential units, and 130,000 square feet of commercial space. But why did the city of San Diego repeal Measure C if it gave them the green light on Midway Rising? Well, something happened in between then and today. The state Supreme Court ruled Measure C invalid. The court argued that the ballot language didn't adequately inform voters about the environmental impacts associated with taller buildings, which is a requirement of CEQA, otherwise known as the California Environmental Quality Act. Supporters of the project and some on this council claim this doesn't bury Midway Rising. They, in fact, point to SB 344 as sort of a last-minute bill in Sacramento that could help Midway Rising by shielding it from future CEQA and environmental lawsuits. Council President Joe LaCava had this to say.
Because of the nature of what Midway Rising is proposing, they can actually get a deviation or variance depending on how the lawyers look at it. And they can say we are not bound by the coastal height limit.
Yeah, so as we come back out here into the studio, should point out that SB 344, there's some urgency behind it, literally. They have what's called an urgency clause in it, which means if it passes, it would need 2/3 approval in the Assembly and the Senate, not just a simple majority, but it would go into effect immediately. So essentially August 31st, September 1st, not January, but they don't have a ton of time. Remember, legislative session ends on the 31st.
So basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, and you did a great job explaining that, this is essentially much ado about nothing. This vote.
The Measure C repeal. At least that's what they're saying.
Yes, this is something in which they knew it was going to happen and we've seen this conversation about this development, and we hear from the city and we hear from supporters who are trying to find a way to get this through. This hasn't necessarily been that major obstacle. This isn't the end of the story here. You mentioned that bill. However, they're operating now with a lot of urgency. We have a statement here talking about what they're looking to do later in the year, but that is dependent on what we might see happen up in Sacramento over the next week, correct?
Over the next week, yeah, because while Measure C basically kind of gave the project the green light to go ahead and move forward despite the 30-foot limit that is in place and CEQA review, which would sort of, bar that from happening, they're hopeful that SB 344 will sort of insulate the project from that sort of CEQA scrutiny, right? That the city's environmental impact review, which would still need to be done, would be sufficient. And so then someone could not go and say, hey, we're suing you on the basis of CEQA. You're in violation of the 30-foot height limit. Because in all likelihood, they are going to have a number of buildings probably that will either exceed or meet that 30-foot height limit.
I think that is a good segue to talk about SB 344 in particular, because a few weeks ago we had a conversation once this legislative session kicked off about the major utility companies and how much money will they need to bear, how much costs will they bear in the case of a major wildfire. That was something that we know that they had been talking to the governor about, and there had been concerns about the possibility of what is called a gut and amend tactic. Essentially what that means is that a bill, let's say a year ago, or from a previous legislative session, or one that just never got off the ground to begin with, is just kind of sitting there in a file, and it has the same title, SB 344. And someone takes that file, clears the text of the bill, and puts something in and kind of proposes it last minute to try to just see if this is something that can get pushed through the legislature without perhaps the discussion that, and I think it's a case-by-case thing. There's going to be more controversial topics where this is a legislative tactic that is really in the spotlight. I'm sure there's other times where it's a little bit more of a formality on something that perhaps isn't as of a hot topic as this is. But that's kind of what we're seeing here, because take a look at this. Originally, SB 34 had to deal with the disposal of human remains at sea. So it was taken from that inactive file, essentially a piece of paper or a document on a computer lying dormant, and just completely rewritten to have this context in this effect, essentially clearing it part of the environmental review.
I was very happy with my writing when I covered SB 344, and that I said that it was being revived. Again, human remains, right? Like, the nature of the So it literally was talking about how to handle and dispose of human remains.
So, but again, there are costs to that, because the threshold in which is required to get one development off the ground here is insanely high. You mentioned 2/3 approval from both houses, of course. Usually there are instances in which, you just take a look at the political and the party makeup of it in a state here where it's so dominated by Democrats. You're like, oh, okay, well, if it's something that is very in line with a Democratic Party platform, 2/3 is not that big of a threshold as perhaps it would be in a different state. But this is a controversial topic here, and that's I just want to make that differentiation that this does not, I don't have any insight as to what an assembly member or a state senator might vote or not, but 2/3 is a high threshold for a project that has generated a lot of controversy here. We know the city is all for it, but is this something that you can take up to Sacramento and get all of these lawmakers to sign off on?
I think there's a couple of things here, because the 2/3 vote is because of the fact that they put that urgency clause in it, right? So had they just kept things sort of status quo, gut and amended it, they would only need a simple majority.
But it would take effect next
January, right? So they're dealing with a lot of things. As you said, it's probably a lot easier to gut and amend a bill when it only needs simple majority. Think about that. There are going to be some lawmakers who, regardless of how they feel about this, may either abstain or vote against it simply because they just feel like they haven't had enough time to think about it, talk about it, discuss it, may not know enough about it. I think also it is extremely hard to sort of figure out California's development issue and not point the finger at the fact that the development in the state has been slow. And in large part, it's been slow because it's not a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is not a party line issue. This is an issue that is splintered amongst the Democratic Party. It is splintered amongst the Republican Party. You have a number, Lori Saldana, who is one of the most staunch opponents of this project, is a former Democratic Assembly member in Sacramento, obviously lives here in San Diego, represented San Diego. She's against this for a variety of environmental reasons and the process in which it is taking place. That is something that it's not as simple as party line. This is not going to be, I think, something that if I'm going to pull up to see what the status of it is, because as we said, we got 6 days left here to sort of track its progress. But I think it's going to be kind of a complicated sell here for, Dr. Akilah Weber Pearson, who is the sort of the author, if you will, of this, the amender, if you will, of SB 344, who has been in large part the biggest proponent here of this project in Sacramento on behalf of San Diego.
So yeah, while you take a look at that, we do know right now that the city is confident. And it seems as if my interpretation is that this is a projection of confidence here, posting on their social media outlets, on their website, taking a look here, pulled this off of Instagram from the city of San Diego. Of course, this is the office that is led by the mayor, Todd Gloria. This is not the city council. This is his office. Just want to make that clear differentiation, because that vote, of course, was the city council, not the city in itself, where it says, quote, "The city is committed to a transformative redevelopment of the sports arena site that would create much needed housing, strengthen the regional economy, and provide long-term community benefits." They continue here to say the Midway Rising project is anticipated to be considered by the Land Use and Housing Committee and City Council later this year. This was just after the City Council had voted to repeal Measure C. So if we're, taking a heat check and trying to see what the city thinks about this, of course, they are in tune in your interpretation, as is this vote that we're talking about today, was that formality. They are, however, expecting progress to continue to be seen here despite what transpired at today's vote. Essentially right now, this is an illegal development. We're waiting for that clearance here at that point. However, when you put a statement like that, that projects confidence that this is going to be something that you're going to see major progression on, whether that's strictly on a legal side at this moment versus the actual development and the progress on that within itself. Again, show of, optimism.
Optimism, confidence. And as far as, again, the ticking time clock here, the status of SB 344 is a bit complicated, as you might imagine. It has technically passed the Senate. But that was when it was the discussion of human remains back on May 15th. It is currently in what is referred to as the third reading grouping, I believe. Let me see here. The third reading file. So it is in the midst of to be read before the assembly. It had already gone through committee. That's how they got the urgency clause there as part of it. So it needs to pass now. It needs to be read and passed during an assembly session. It needs 2/3 vote, but it's going to have to go back to the Senate, and they have 6 days to get this done. So if the Senate then does anything to amend it, as we know, again, we've all seen Schoolhouse Rock, right? Then it goes back to you can't amend these things, and so the fact that it was gutted and amended previously does not, and passed by the fact that it was passed by the Senate does not mean that it is sort of like scotch clear, like it can just be passed by the assembly and then we're good. And also because of that urgency clause, the Senate previously passed this. I don't know what the vote totals were, but again, if it wasn't 2/3, then that nullifies the urgency clause, right? Which is the whole point of doing this. So we're still a ways away from even SB 34 being signed into law.
And we also know that if it in fact is signed into law, there's still steps that the city has to do. That is certifying the environmental impact review, the EIR, that is approving the project.
Yeah, they still have to vote on
process.
This. Yeah, they still have to vote on this.
Which, to kind of go back here to the statement, and I still have it up there, when you hear the city saying later this year, we know that urgency clause triggers that law into effect right away versus that period in which we wait for it to go into effect, which of course would be the beginning of next year. So when you hear we're going to have hearings and we're going to have considerations, they expect that urgency clause to not be the hamstring to the voting process here. Whether or not that is what transpires, of course, that is a complete other variable here, but we have a week here. So we're going to be getting an answer to that very soon.
Yeah, very soon. And I do wonder if, SB 344 is required. I don't want to call it required reading because I don't want to, but essentially, like, does that need to happen in order for the city to even, like, if they vote on it, they approve of it, but like, does Midway Rising and the developer say, hey, look, SB 344 didn't get passed and we're going to take our ball and go home? Like, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So
could be a critical week.
Yeah, like we've got 6 days here, and I'm already starting to feel the the juice is flowing and that things are going to get heating up here pretty quickly, even though it feels like things are already moving at a pretty fast pace.